pregnant leopard collapsed on a ranger's porch in the middle of an Ohio storm, clawing at his door like a desperate neighbor begging for help. What Michael Torres did next broke every rule he'd ever learned. And 3 weeks later, when he was dying alone in a ravine with his legs shattered and darkness closing in, that same leopard returned to repay a debt that defied nature itself. Before we dive in, quick question. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing where our community is tuning in from. Globe showing Europe, Africa. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we bring you the most incredible true stories where humans and animals cross paths in ways that'll leave you speechless. Now, let's get into the story. The silence in the Ohio wilderness doesn't just surround you. It crawls inside your skull. Michael Torres had spent 3 years at Blackwood Station learning to live with it, 12 miles from the nearest paved road, where the only sounds were his own breathing and the whisper of wind through ancient pines. Tonight, that silence felt different, heavier, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He moved through his nightly routine with military precision. Perimeter check at 2,100 hours, fresh pot of coffee at 21:30, radio log transmitted to base at 21:45. His Remington 700 leaned against the wall beside his cot, loaded, safety on, always within arm's reach. 15 years as a ranger had taught him that the wilderness respected order, protocols, predictable patterns. Step outside those lines, and nature would remind you, brutally, that you were just another animal trying to survive. At 2,200 hours, the storm rolled in from Lake Erie like God's own fist. Thunder shook the cabin's foundation. Michael secured the shutters, double-checked the deadbolt, and settled into his worn chair with a stack of incident reports. The top file made his jaw tighten. Exotic animal sightings, Cuyahoga Valley Sector 7. 3 separate reports in 2 weeks. Something was out there that shouldn't be. Rumors whispered about an illegal breeding operation deep in the valley, but no one had found it yet. No one wanted to. The wind shrieked. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 fists. Michael's coffee went cold in his hand as he read about trap injuries, strange tracks, a large golden cat spotted near Devil's Drop. His gut twisted. Whatever was out, there was suffering, and suffering things were dangerous. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., the knocking began. Thump! Michael's head snapped up. Thump! His blood went ice cold. Animals don't knock. They scratch, they claw, they slam their bodies against wood in panic. But this, thump, this was rhythmic, deliberate, intelligent. Training kicked in before thought could catch up. He rose silently, grabbed the Remington, chambered around. His heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the door. Protocol. Visual confirmation before any action. Never open the door blind. He pressed his eye to the reinforced peephole, expecting a lost hiker, maybe a camper who'd ignored storm warnings. Hell, even a black bear wouldn't have surprised him. What he saw made his entire understanding of the world tilt sideways. A leopard, golden coat plastered dark by rain, massive paws planted on his wooden porch like she belonged there. Her sides heaved with exhaustion. But it was her eyes, those impossibly human-like eyes, that froze Michael's breath in his lungs. They locked onto the peephole, onto him. She knew he was watching. And in those amber depths, he saw something that shouldn't exist in a wild predator's gaze. Please. The leopard's strength suddenly failed. She slumped against the door, her weight rattling the frame. Michael's angle shifted, and he saw what he'd missed before. The right front paw mangled and swollen, trap wounds festering with infection. The grotesquely distended belly. She was heavily pregnant, maybe days from giving birth. Her flanks trembled with each labored breath. Then he saw it, rain streaming down her face, yes, but mixed with something else. Something that caught the porch light and glistened differently. His scientific brain rejected it immediately, but his soul recognized the truth. Is it possible for a wild animal to weep? Another scratch at the door. Not aggressive, not territorial, pleading, like a neighbor asking for help, like a mother begging for her children's lives. Michael's hand moved without conscious thought, reaching not for the door handle, but for his rifle's safety. 15 years of training screamed in his head. Apex predator. Unpredictable. Lethal. Do not open that door. Every regulation, every protocol, every hard-learned lesson about maintaining the boundary between human and wild shrieked the same message. But he couldn't tear his eyes from hers. In that golden, human-like gaze, he saw the mama black bear he'd found 3 years ago, dying in an illegal trap while her cubs starved nearby. He saw every animal he couldn't save, every life that slipped through his fingers because he'd followed the rules, maintained the boundaries, done everything right. The leopard's paw scratched once more, weak, desperate, asking. Michael's hand hovered in the space between his rifle and the door handle. Between everything he'd been trained to do and everything his shattered heart was screaming at him to do. Outside, thunder cracked like the world splitting open. Inside, a man faced the choice that would define the rest of his life. What he did next defied every law of nature and man. Michael backed away from the door, his mind performing brutal calculations. He'd seen death before, knew its signature, its slow claim on living things. And he saw it now in those impossibly human-like eyes staring through his peephole. Not death coming for him, death coming for her. Through the rain-streaked window, he watched her pregnant belly contract violently. Once, twice, her body convulsed with a pain that transcended species, a mother's agony, raw and primal. She was in labor, out here, alone, dying. Without intervention, she'd be gone by dawn. The cubs with her. Another mama. Another failure he'd carry for the rest of his life. The ghost of that black bear rose in his memory. Her glassy eyes, her cubs' silent bodies, the trap's steel teeth still locked on her leg. He'd followed protocol that day, called it in, waited for backup. By the time they arrived, the forest had already taken them all back. Not again. Michael's hands moved with sudden purpose. First aid kit from the cabinet. Heavy wool blanket from the chest. His backup Glock, holstered but accessible. He approached the door, pressed his palm against the wood, and spoke in a low, steady voice that surprised him with its calmness. I'm going to help you, girl. Don't make me regret this. His hand shook as he reached for the deadbolt. The click sounded like a gunshot in the small cabin. Every instinct screamed that he was crossing a threshold he could never uncross. The door swung open. Wind and rain exploded into the cabin. The leopard didn't lunge. She struggled to stand, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Michael pressed himself flat against the wall, giving her space. His breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. She limped past him, leaving bloody paw prints on his wooden floor. The smell hit him like a physical force. Rain-soaked earth, copper blood, and something else. Something ancient and primal that made every hair on his body stand at attention. Her tail dragged across his leg as she passed. He flinched but held perfectly still, watching as 200 pounds of apex predator entered his home like a desperate refugee seeking asylum. She collapsed near the stone fireplace, sides heaving, and the cabin transformed. This was no longer Michael's sanctuary. It was a den, and he was no longer the master of this space. He was a guest in the presence of royalty. He moved slowly, deliberately, adding logs to the fireplace. Flames caught and swelled. The light danced across her golden coat, and when her eyes met his, that unnerving intelligence pierced straight through him. Something in those eyes understood what he'd just done, what he just risked. Outside, the storm intensified. The world contracted to this single room, this impossible moment. Michael knelt beside his medical supplies, assessing the damage. Her right front paw was swollen to twice its normal size, trap marks carved deep into flesh, infection spreading in angry red tendrils. He knew the math. Without treatment, sepsis would take her before morning. The cubs would die inside her. He gathered what he had: antiseptic sterile gauze, antibiotics meant for livestock emergencies. Not ideal, but it was everything. He approached on his knees, making himself smaller, less threatening. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it pulsing in his ears. "Easy now," he whispered, voice barely audible above the storm. "I gotcha. Just gonna clean this up." His fingers touched the infected paw. The growl that erupted from her chest vibrated through the floorboards, through his bones, through his soul. It was the sound of a predator reminding the world exactly what she was. Michael froze, every muscle locked, but he kept his eyes on hers, kept talking in that low, steady voice. I know it hurts, but I can help. I will help." Slowly, deliberately, the leopard laid her head down on the wooden floor. Not sleep, submission. She was trusting him with her life. Michael's hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound while his mind struggled to process what was happening. The leopard's breathing gradually synchronized with his. Inhale, exhale, a rhythm shared between species that should be mortal enemies. He wrapped the paw in clean gauze, tied it off with hands that had finally stopped shaking. When he finished, she exhaled, a sound almost like relief, almost like gratitude. Michael dragged his sleeping bag to the far corner, his Glock within reach. But somewhere deep in his gut, he knew she wouldn't attack. "We're gonna get through this night together," he whispered to the storm, to the leopard, to whatever god was watching this impossible scene. Her ear flicked toward his voice. She'd heard him. Then her body convulsed again, harder this time, and a sound emerged from her throat that made Michael's blood turn to ice. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a roar. It was a scream. Michael didn't sleep. He couldn't. He sat with his back against the cold cabin wall and watched her breathe. Each rise and fall of her golden rib cage a small miracle, a defiance of the death he'd seen claiming her just hours before. Outside, 2:30 a.m. The storm still raged like something alive and angry. Inside, firelight painted shifting shadows across the walls. The smell of antiseptic mixed with wet fur and with smoke created an atmosphere that felt pulled from some fever dream. The leopard shifted, uncomfortable, her breathing pattern changing from the steady rhythm of rest to something faster, shallower, more urgent. Michael's pulse quickened. He recognized that shift. He'd seen it in deer, in raccoons, even once in a black bear from a safe distance. But never like this. Never in an apex predator lying 6 feet from him on his own floor. At 3:15 a.m., the first real contraction rippled across her distended belly like a wave moving under her skin. Her head lifted sharply, pupils dilating to black pools rimmed with gold. Those impossibly human-like eyes found his across the firelight, and in them he saw something that stopped his breath. It's happening. Stay with me. Okay, Michael whispered, sitting up straighter. Okay, here we go. The leopard stood on trembling legs, began a pace. She circled the small space near the hearth, lay down, stood again. Ancient instinct older than humanity itself, taking control. Her movements were ritualistic, primal, a dance choreographed by millions of years of evolution. Michael had witnessed births before, but this felt like watching creation itself unfold in real time. By 3:45 a.m., the contractions intensified. Her growls shifted from low warnings to guttural sounds of pain that seemed torn from the deepest part of her being. A mother's agony, raw and unfiltered. Michael felt helpless, intrusive, like he was trespassing on sacred ground where no human had any right to stand. 4 a.m. She'd been pushing for 45 minutes. Nothing was happening. Sweat matted her fur despite the cool air. Her sides heaved with exhaustion, and in her eyes, those golden, human-like eyes, Michael saw something that made his chest constrict. Panic. Or was he projecting? His veterinary training was minimal, limited to basic field medicine for injured wildlife. His hands clenched uselessly at his sides as he watched her struggle. Every instinct screamed at him to do something, but what? Intervene and risk hurting her? Or trust nature to take its course? The memory rose unbidden. The mama bear in the trap, her cubs huddled nearby, slowly starving while he waited for backup that arrived too late. He'd followed protocol, done everything right, and they'd all died anyway. Not again. Not this time. Michael moved closer, hands raised, palms out. "I'm here," he said softly. "I'm right here. You're not alone." The leopard's head whipped toward him. A snarl ripped from her throat. A warning, clear and unmistakable, but not an attack. Not quite. Michael froze, then slowly backed off, giving her space while staying close enough to help when she needed him. At 4:23 a.m., everything changed. A wet, dark shape emerged. The leopard twisted with surprising grace, bit away the translucent sack with precision born of pure instinct. A tiny cub, perfect, helpless, impossibly small, spilled onto the wooden floor, mewling weakly. She licked it clean with fierce, desperate strokes, her entire body language transformed in an instant. Michael's throat tightened. He was witnessing the heart of creation itself, the moment when a warrior became a mother. All aggression melted from her golden eyes. The deadly predator who could have torn him apart hours ago now nuzzled her newborn cub with heartbreaking tenderness, guiding it toward her belly. The cub found a teat, latched on, and the sound of suckling filled the cabin. Absurdly domestic, impossibly tender. At 5:10 a.m., the second cub arrived faster, easier. Michael finally allowed himself to breathe. Twin cubs, both nursing now, while their mother lay exhausted but alert, her gaze constantly sweeping between her babies and the human who'd given her sanctuary. Dawn began to break through the storm clouds. Golden light filtered through the shutters, painting everything the same color as the leopard's coat. Michael sat with his back against the wall, his coffee long, cold, and forgotten. He watched a deadly predator nurse her young on his braided rug, and the surrealism of it threatened to shatter his understanding of reality itself. The leopard's eyes found his across the dying firelight. No aggression in that gaze. No fear. Just acknowledgement. Two beings who had crossed an impossible threshold together and emerged changed on the other side. Michael felt tears on his face. Didn't bother wiping them away. "You did good, Mama," he whispered. "You did real good." Outside, The storm broke. Inside, only the sound of breathing, the crackle of fire, the tiny mules of new life. Michael realized with sudden clarity, this was his redemption. The mama bear he couldn't save, the cubs he'd watched starve, forgiven. Not by the universe, but by himself. He could finally let it go. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest beyond his cabin walls, another sound cut through the dawn. A roar. Male. Territorial. The leopard's head snapped up, ears flat against her skull. And Michael understood they weren't safe yet. By 7:30 a.m., full daylight had conquered the storm. Michael sat motionless against the cabin wall, legs numb from hours in the same position, cold coffee clutched in his hand. The scene before him defied every law of nature he'd spent 15 years learning. A golden leopard and two newborn cubs asleep by his stone hearth, their breathing synchronized in the peaceful rhythm of a family at rest. He documented nothing. No photos. No radio call. This was a secret between him and the wild. A sacred covenant that would shatter under the weight of official reports and wildlife protocols. At 9 a.m., the leopard's eyes opened. Michael watched her body language shift instantly. Muscles tensing, ears swiveling, nose testing the air. The restlessness of something that didn't belong here, however safe it might be. She nuzzled the cubs with her scarred muzzle, encouraging them to nurse one more time, and Michael recognized what was happening. The wildness was calling her home. She stood carefully, testing the wounded paw wrapped in his bandage. The gauze held. She favored it, but she could walk. That primal intelligence flickered in those impossibly human-like eyes as she picked up the first cub by the scruff. Gentle but firm, the way mothers have carried their young since the beginning of time. Michael moved to the door without being asked, understanding her need before she could express it. He swung it open wide. Fresh morning air flooded the cabin. Pine, wet earth, and freedom. The smell of a world that belonged to her, not to him. She carried the first cub to the porch, set it down with maternal precision, then returned for the second. Michael stood in the doorway, watching, feeling an unexpected grief rise in his chest. Something profound was ending. Something he didn't have words for. At the trilene, she paused. Both cubs dangled from her mouth, mewling softly. She turned back, and their eyes met one final time across the clearing. No sound, no gesture, just a look. But Michael felt it in his chest, in his bones, in some ancient part of his brain that remembered when humans and animals spoke the same language. Thank you. I will not forget. She burned his image into her memory, his scent, his face, his essence. He knew she would carry this moment with her forever, the same way he would. Then she turned and vanished into the forest like golden smoke dissolving into shadow. The cubs' mewling faded to silence. Michael stood on the empty porch for a long time, feeling the cabin behind him grow cavernous and hollow. When he finally turned back inside, the evidence remained. Bloody paw prints on the floor, a flattened rug, the lingering smell of something wild and sacred. He cleaned methodically, erasing the physical proof, but he couldn't erase the feeling that something profound had been lost when she walked away. At 10:15 a.m., he keyed his radio. Blackwood Station to base. Quiet night. Storm damage minimal. All clear. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Days passed. Michael returned to his routine patrols, but he was different now. Softer. More observant. He noticed things he'd walked past 1,000 times before. A fox den tucked beneath exposed roots, an owl's nest cradled in ancient branches, the way afternoon light filtered through autumn leaves like liquid gold. He found himself stopping at the tree line where she'd vanished, searching for tracks he knew he wouldn't find. "You take care of those babies, you hear?" He'd whisper to the forest. The wild kept its secrets. No response ever came. 3 weeks later, late October painted the valley in rust and fire. Michael received his assignment: patrol Devil's Drop, a treacherous ravine system where the earth itself seemed determined to kill you. The area was notorious for rock slides, unstable ledges, and lately, poachers. He moved carefully along the narrow ridge trail, eyes scanning for wire snares. Illegal traps had been found throughout this sector, the same kind that had nearly killed the leopard. The irony wasn't lost on him. Men like these, operating in the shadows, had caused her suffering. Now he was hunting them through their own hunting grounds. The trail narrowed. Michael stepped carefully onto a rock outcrop to get a better view of the ravine below. Something felt wrong. The stone beneath his boot shifted almost imperceptibly. He had half a second to recognize the hidden fracture, the storm damage from 3 weeks ago that had weakened the world dropped away. Michael's arms windmilled uselessly as the rock gave way completely. He was falling, tumbling through empty air, and the last thing he registered before impact was the terrible certainty that he'd just made a fatal mistake. The crack of bone against stone echoed through the ravine like a gunshot. Then silence. Then pain. Somewhere above, a raven's cry split the afternoon air. And deep in the forest, golden eyes opened in the darkness. At 4:47 p.m., Michael stepped onto the rock outcrop for a better view of the ravine below. The stone shifted. A hidden fracture, storm damage from 3 weeks ago that had gone unnoticed, waiting like a loaded trap. It gave way. He had 1 second to realize, "I'm going to die." 30 feet of empty air. His body slammed against granite, tumbling, bones meeting stone in a percussion of breaking. He landed hard on a narrow ledge above the ravine's deepest drop. Pain exploded through his left leg, a sound like a branch snapping, his tibia punching through skin. Michael gasped, vision whiting out. His radio lay smashed 10 feet away, out of reach. His pack scattered somewhere above. He was alone, immobilized, bleeding. By 5:30 p.m., sunset painted the sky in blood and gold. Michael tried to crawl. Agony stopped him cold. No one knew he was here. He checked in at 2 p.m., wasn't due back until morning. Search wouldn't start for 12 hours. By then, blood loss, exposure, predators. He knew the math. He thought of the leopard, the cubs, that impossible night. At least I got to see something beautiful before the end. At 6:15 p.m., twilight brought dropping temperatures and movement in the brush below. Michael drew his sidearm with excruciating effort, knowing it wouldn't matter. Consciousness wavered. Shock was claiming him. Then, at 6:40 p.m., a fluid shadow appeared on the ridge above. Michael's heart sank. A predator come to finish what gravity had started. The shadow was large, feline, deliberate. It paused, backlit by dying light. His eyes focused, the golden coat. The bandaged paw, still wrapped. 2 cubs at her side, now the size of house cats. Michael's breath stopped. "It's her." She came back. "Hey there, Mama," he whispered through cracked lips. "It's me." The leopard didn't descend. Instead, she lifted her head high, opened her jaws, and released a sound Michael had never heard before. Not a roar, not a growl. A call, rhythmic, patterned, resonant, piercing. It echoed through the valley, bouncing off stone walls like a siren cutting through the wilderness. She called again, and again. A beacon. At 7:10 p.m., distant voices. Rangers Jackson and DeLuca arrived, flashlights sweeping the darkness. "The leopard," Michael gasped as they reached him. "She called you, she saved me." "Easy, Torres, you're in shock. Look, up there." They looked. Nothing but empty ridge and stars. As they stabilized his shattered leg, Michael scanned the trilene one last time. Movement. Golden eyes reflecting starlight. The leopard watched silently as humans lifted him onto the stretcher. Their eyes met across the darkness. Debt repaid. We're even now. She melted into the forest, cubs following, becoming legend. Michael was airlifted to Cleveland Metro Hospital. Compound fracture, severe blood loss, but he'd live. The rescue team still debates what they heard that night. Official report. Unusual animal vocalization led to Torres's discovery. Months later, Michael returned to Blackwood Station. He never saw the leopard again, but sometimes at night, he hears her call in the distance. The illegal breeding facility was raided. Authorities found only empty cages. Michael knows. She's out there, raising her cubs in freedom. On his cabin door, he carved 2 words, "Sanctuary given," and beneath it, "Sanctuary returned." Where once a desperate mother knocked in the storm, now only wind and starlight touched the weathered wood. But Michael knows the truth that night revealed. In the wilderness, there are laws older than survival. Laws written in compassion, remembered in golden eyes, and repaid when life recognizes life. Sometimes, the wildest hearts remember the deepest kindness. And mercy, once given, is never forgotten. If you believe that compassion transcends all boundaries, that mercy shown to the wild can return when we need it most, then like and share this story. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories where humanity and nature collide in the most unexpected ways. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you.